Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be talking about the next installment of the weird and wonderful saga of Sam Kieth's masterpiece, The Maxx. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in May of 1993, The Maxx number 3 has a really cool, up close picture of Max. He looks like he's ready to rumble, like a fight's about to go down. Oddly enough, I've always felt that Sam's depiction of Max on the covers never fully matched his depiction of Max on the interior of the books in terms of Max being a little bit more bumbling and unsure of himself than he ever appears on the covers of the books. But this might be a way for Sam to illustrate the difference in how Max sees himself versus how Max truly is as a person. I don't know. That's just a theory I have. But once again, it always feels like a little bit of two sides of the same coin when comparing the covers to the interior. Story, pencils, inks. Sam Kieth. Dialogue, Bill Messner, Lobes. Finisher, Jim Sinclair. Lettering, Mike Heisler, Kevin Cunningham. Color, Steve Oliff and Ollie Optics. Film output, Tony Kelly and Kel-O-Graphics. Logo, Chance Wolfe. We see here on the first page, we are right back into the savage lands of what Max refers to as the Australian outback. However, it's nothing like the outback that we would know to be in the real world, as we are shown a glimpse of a gibbety, I believe is the way you say it, GBH''TYT, or outback slug. That's just Sam coming up with crazy names for non-existent animals. We see that Max is kind of describing the animals of the outback in his inner monologue, as he states that the outback slug has mastered the art of jumping nearly a quarter mile in the air. However, it has not mastered the art of landing and has never successfully done so. He states that the slug has no natural predators, it's just stupid. However, the northern cabbit has mastered the art of jumping and landing. Unfortunately, it is preyed upon by the which has mastered the art of jumping, landing, and has no natural predators unless you count one individual. That individual, of course, being none other than Max, as we see him depicted here back in New York City, as we are shown an image very similar to what we saw on the last page, except this time it is one of the black as he continues to follow it down an alleyway because he believes this will lead him straight to Mr. Gone. He comes out of the alleyway onto a crowded street. Surprisingly, none of the people in the street seem to be all that bothered by this enormous dude in a purple costume with claws and incredibly huge feet. I don't know if this is supposed to just be a take on the fact that Max is envisioning himself in a way that he is not seen by others, or if it's just that the people of this universe, being still part of the greater Image universe, are just so used to seeing weirdos in costumes flying around and big muscle-bound Hulk dudes that they just take it as old hat at this point. I'd also like to point out that I love how Max is actually drawn in as part of the border of the panel. That's really cool. Max continues to follow the talking about how he, seems to be garnering stares and disapproval of the people around him. Mostly because, he seems to be chasing a 96-year-old granny because, as we've learned, the when wearing clothing of people in this world, appear to be the person who should be in that clothing to the humans around him. But then Max also realizes that he's probably been saying all of this dialogue out loud, which has been garnering the stares of people around him as well. Then we once again see the chung, 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 and Max talks about the pounding in his head and is suddenly back in the outback. He realizes that this has happened and tries to maintain a focus on what he was doing, that he can't forget about Mr. Gone and protecting the city, and that he has to keep those things in his immediate memory so that he can protect Julie and make sure that the city as a whole is protected under his watchful eye, until he suddenly forgets all of that and can't even remember why he's following this is. However, he rationalizes that it was probably for a good reason, so he continues onward in his quest. As Maxx continues to pursue the Is through the grasses, he states to himself that he is the king of this world, the warrior slash predator who, is mighty and strong, but then also notes that it seems like even though he perceives himself as pushing through grass, it feels like he's actually pushing through hordes of people who look upon him with fear and contempt, as we see an image of what appears to be a crowd on the streets of New York City. However, he tries to put that out of his mind, as he believes it is just a vision given to him by an evil shaman or perhaps an evil sorcerer. As he continues to pursue the Is, he states that even this passing air whale seems to be like it is an object from another world, as we see that it's clearly supposed to be an actual Goodyear blimp that's only hovering about 50 feet or so above the streets of New York. Although that seems strange, I can't imagine an instance in which the Goodyear blimp would only be hovering like 50 feet above the streets of New York, below the skyscraper line. But, it makes for a cool shot, really kind of showing off the fact that Maxx is existing in both planes at the same time, but he can only truly perceive one of them as being real. Maxx continues his chase, gaining on the Is, moving past other animals through the outback, and he believes he's just about got his prey when suddenly things take a turn. As we see spears launch up from the ground, killing what is referred to by Maxx as a Seussodon, which I can only assume is a homage to one Dr. Seuss, who would have not been dead for all that long when this book was first published. I believe Dr. Seuss died in late 91 or early 92. I'm just going off memory, but it was somewhere around that time frame. Maxx dodges the spears, lunges forward, and grabs the Is that he's been pursuing. However, the Is lets out a cry as the pounding in his head starts again, and then all of a sudden he hears the roar of an Is stampede, which has been triggered by the cries of the Is that he's captured. As they lunge forward, Maxx realizes that he has to fight for his life and states that he will not be taken, for he is the Maxx. However, he starts to succumb once again to the rattling in his head and is suddenly captured by a net that springs up from the ground and captures him with a bunch of Ises, and things are looking bad for Maxx until he decides that he's not going to go out like this. As we see Maxx burst out of the nets as the Ises lunge again, he exclaims no, as he does not plan on dying today. We see a panel filled with nothing but just comic book words of slice, slam, and meeps, and all sorts of cries of battle. And then we see Maxx triumphant standing on the pile of dead Ises, exclaiming that he is victorious, until he turns around and realizes that there are way more Ises than he realized, as he then starts to try and make a getaway as the Is stampede follows him, and he's not certain how he's going to get out of this one. As Maxx continues trying to make his escape, being pursued by the horde of Ises, he is also faced with having to dodge more spear and net traps. At one point, he states that he's not really sure where these traps came from. He believes that they were laid by an ancient race, which no longer exists. However, he's not fast enough to dodge the net, as it grabs him and pulls him deep underground. He exclaims that he will not be captured because he is, until he slams on the ground with a loud thud. Then suddenly in the darkness, Maxx sees the small doll that we saw the Leopard Queen brush the head off of in issue number 2 simply just state mommy as he exclaims no, and then sits up in a bathroom and exclaims that he hates waking up in other people's nightmares. He also doesn't know how he knows this is a bathroom, as he is convinced that he is the Maxx of the savage outback and that he shouldn't know anything about this world or its technologies, as he realizes that he understands valves and leaky faucets, and he tries his best to try and stop the dripping because it's annoying him. We see him start to move one of the levers. Unfortunately for him, he kind of overdoes it and a large valve springs a leak. I'd also like to point out that there's a lot of negative space around the borders of these 2 pages, but somehow Sam makes it work due to the intricacy of the way he draws the panels in this page, and the white border really serves to just kind of focus your attention directly on the action at hand. It's a really cool way to draw less but make it mean more. That's one of the things I kind of criticized Todd about in a few issues of Spawn, where I felt like he was taking some shortcuts in not drawing backgrounds in some of the panels, and just leaving a lot of like negative space that wasn't being used. But I think that had to do more so with the fact that Todd was drawing panels in a more conventional, typical comic book style, so it felt empty, whereas Sam might be doing the same thing, but he's disguising it really, really well if that's what he's doing. And honestly, I'm not sure that's what he was doing, because like I said, his panels are so ridiculously stylized in a way that no one else was really doing at the time. And honestly, I don't know that there's a lot of people who are doing it that way now. But it just kind of really, makes you ignore that there's so much blank on these 2 pages because you're so focused on the story that's being depicted. Unfortunately for Maxx, the water main burst and smacks him with a huge blast of water, which slams him against the opposite wall. And then he is greeted by a familiar voice, that of none other than Mr. Gone, who is somehow alive and well despite having his head cut off by Julie Winters in the previous issue. He's wearing this weird tribal mask that he states he uses to scare the natives in the savage land so that he can harvest the Is in peace and also hunt the animals he needs to feed them. He then takes off the mask, revealing his true face, and then proceeds to hit Maxx with the mask, stating that he wants him to give something like that to Julie Winters, as he states that he may not have a head to go back to on the 5th zone because of what she did, implying that somehow Mr. Gone is existing on multiple planes or in different dimensions, and that his death in one of these places does not equate to his death in all of these places. Maxx, however, is just enraged by the presence of Mr. Gone as he jumps into action, preparing to attack, trying to stab him with his claws, which Mr. Gone uses the mask he had on to block. And then he actually states that it's because Maxx doesn't remember anything, including their battle at the gas station. Maxx continues his rage attack as he rips the mask apart. Mr. Gone states that he'll have to remember the things that, have been going on, and he tries to explain to Maxx about how this is just something different and that they've had an encounter like this before. He also realizes that here in the Outback world, Maxx is far stronger, as Maxx continues to lunge forward and try to stab him, and just completely ignoring all of the different talking points that Mr. Gone is bringing up. Finally, Mr. Gone starts to make a little bit of headway in talking to Maxx and tells him that they can't waste time in this battle. Maxx questions why, and Mr. Gone tells him that it's because he's not a superhero, he's actually a protector, and that he is the Leopard Queen specifically or the Leopard Queen's protector specifically. Maxx seems to be a little bit daunted by this as he kind of slows down his attack a tad. Mr. Gone tells Maxx that the two of them are linked souls and that she is lost in the city and in her own mind. Maxx says that this can't be, and why should he believe Mr. Gone in anything he says? And then Mr. Gone states that he can make him, or that he can convince Maxx of all the things he's saying with one word, and then simply states mommy, the same thing that the doll spoke to him a few pages ago. Then Maxx starts to realize things aren't exactly what he thinks they might be, and Mr. Gone seems to have answers to questions that Maxx has had for a long time. He tells Maxx that he knows all about Max's dream, the doll, everything. He knows, who Maxx was before he found the mask. And Maxx then starts to let off of his attack as Mr. Gone tells him that he knows the truth and, he knows exactly what Maxx looks like underneath the mask, despite the fact that Maxx has been too cowardly to take it off and look for himself. Maxx tells him to explain. However, Mr. Gone tells him that the story of Maxx is really one that's just kind of, embarrassing, whereas the story behind Julie is something that could possibly destroy her. This catches Max's attention as he wants to protect her, and that he just now is starting to realize that Julie and the Leopard Queen are the same person. Mr. Gone tells him that, it's going to be a long night and he's going to explain these things to him, and that the primitive world that they're in, that Maxx believes is the Australian outback, is actually what Mr. Gone refers to as Pangea, and that the city of New York is actually a dream world where they're living out and playing out their deepest fantasies. As the world then starts to transition back to that of New York City, as we see some familiar sights from past issues, we see the inner monologue of Gone telling Maxx that he has to go back to the city and protect Julie and prevent her from learning too much of the truth all at once, because the truth will destroy her. However, Maxx states, though, in his monologue that that's what, Mr. Gone told him, and who can believe a villain? As we see here on the next page, Maxx and Julie are sitting together on the edge of something. I don't know if it's the edge of a pier or the edge of a building, but he's clipping her toenails as the two of them talk. Maxx asks Julie if they've reached the stage in their relationship that toenail clipping is appropriate. She just laughs it off and then tells him that he's being too careful before she just grabs her foot and bites one of her toenails off, which Maxx finds repulsive. However, he states in his thoughts that she's been different ever since being kidnapped by Mr. Gone, and that she's starting to act different, and she's not quite as abrasive and seems more calculated than she was before. It's also interesting that Mr. Gone would seem to have such a interest in keeping Julie safe, despite the fact that in the last issue, he had kidnapped her and bound her up, and for all intents and purposes, was just going to turn her into some kind of, sexual plaything for himself. So it's odd to see his motivations seem to suddenly change. That is, if those are his real motivations and not just a clever ruse that he's using to try and control Maxx. We then see that the world of New York City is once again colliding with the world of the Australian outback or Pangea, whichever one happens to be the real one. As Maxx and Julie continue their conversation, Maxx asks Julie if she's feeling okay after being kidnapped. She states that Gone tried to, use his tricks on her, but she got the best of him. She says then that she hates whining and professional victims, and that she has to hear these things all day as an independent social worker. She says, people say, oh, I was robbed, I was raped, nobody loved me, none of these things matter, that they all have to start taking responsibility for their own actions. However, Maxx pushes back in a way stating that it seems like, if somebody got raped, that it wasn't their fault, that it wasn't like they failed or that they were fired from a job, that it's one of the few times where you are truly a victim, and that, it's okay for you to finally, be upset and express your frustrations. Julia tells him, though, to can it with the feminist liberal garbage and save it for someone who cares. But she then quickly apologizes, stating to Maxx that, she knows he's just trying to watch out for her the same way that he always does, and that she's going to be just fine. However, we also see the monologue of Maxx as he talks about how Mr. Gone told him the story of a young architectural student who was beaten and raped and left for dead. And when she got out of the hospital, she used all of her tuition to become a freelance social worker and then use her position to somewhat help people, but also control people. And that she was using it as a way to mask her own pain, and that her better self was imprisoned in self-loathing, or at least that's what Gone told him, but he's not sure he can believe anything that Gone told him about Julie. And in fact, he was already starting to forget all of these things as if they were such a really bad, or as if it was just a really bad dream. We can also see here that the depiction of Julie is the same as the depiction of the Leopard Queen in terms of, how they're sitting, how they seem to be just kind of distant. Julie finally leaning on Maxx for a little bit of comfort. However, the Leopard Queen has no such comfort as we see her curled up in a ball and slowly let go of one tear. This is a really interesting way of, showing that there's a very deep and difficult emotional struggle going on within Julie that is due to her not dealing with the trauma of her past as we reach the end of the story in this issue. Here on the next page, we see an advertisement for Deathmate Red featuring Youngblood and Bloodshot. I have not done any issue or videos on Deathmate as of yet, but I plan to at some point. And then we also see an advertisement for Shadowhawk 2, number 2, The Mask Comes Off. If you'd like to know more about Shadowhawk, check out my Shadowhawk playlist. On the next page, we get Maxx Tracks, the letter section for the comic, where most of the letters are really kind of tongue-in-cheek and super weird. And given the subject matter of Maxx issues number 1 and 2, it's understandable. Those issues are weird, and, you put weird out there, you're going to get weird back. Oddly enough, I find it that still a lot of people seem to be really upset about the fact that Sam depicted Julie as wearing bell bottoms in the first 2 issues. And we're really upset that Sam was going to potentially influence women to start wearing bell bottoms again, which he states that he's more than fine with. But I just feel it's kind of funny that so many people were like, please don't bring back this pant style from 20 years ago or 20 years prior to when this was originally published. And we're so fixated on it of like, we can't let this happen again, as if, fashion isn't like some kind of circular thing that always comes back. On the next page, we see more letters and more fan art. One letter even asking why Maxx has big donuts on the side of his shoes. And Sam's response was, I never thought that they looked like donuts. To me, I always thought they looked like bagels, which is a terrific way to answer that letter. I got to applaud him. Again, Sam's a weird guy, but he has a really unique sense of humor, and sometimes he knows exactly just what to say when really oddball letters came into the Maxx Tracks section. Here on the next page, we see an advertisement for Shaman's Tears. I don't think I have any issues of Shaman's Tears. If I do, I'll make some videos on them. If not, it'll just be one more thing I got to keep an eye out for the next time I go on a run to dig through back issues. And then we get an advertisement for Deathmate Black. Once again, the things I said about Deathmate before still hold true. One day I'll get around to it. We then get a giant 2-page ad for something called Maximum Sound, and I want to find one of these so bad. So what Maximum Sound was Sam Keith apparently paid voice actors to do an audio version of Maxx issues 1 through 3. So essentially, it's an audiobook of the Maxx for the first 3 issues, and I would love to get my hands on one of these. Unfortunately, as far as I could tell, it was only released on audio cassette, which means even if I find one, I'm going to have to also go out and get a cassette player, because I'm pretty positive I don't have one of those lying around anymore. But I want to find one of these so bad, especially if I could find it in the original case. That would be amazing. I would love to have this as part of, like, you know, just those weird and wacky things that Sam was putting out in terms of, you know, companion merchandise to go along with this comic book. On the final page of the book, we get an advertisement for Union. If you'd like to know more about Union, please feel free to check out my Union playlist. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for American Comics and Entertainment, which was a mail-away service where you could order comics online, try to get back issues. This is all pre-eBay, of course, people. So, you know, it was basically, if you needed back issues and you didn't have a comic book in your area or a comic book store in your area, this is kind of what you were reduced to, which is unfortunate, but, you know, that was the technology of the day, I suppose. And that was the Maxx number 3, obviously following in the footsteps of the first 2 issues, still being very weird. You still don't really have a sense of what's going on. It is really cool, as myself being someone who's read this entire series, to go back and read this issue and understand how many, like, down the road story points were being set up by this issue alone, and understanding the kind of slow burn that Sam Keith was going for. And really, I got to applaud the guy for having the foresight to place story points in this issue that you wouldn't get payoff and explanation for like another, you know, year or two down the road. Like, there was a lot of setup going on in this book that I'm not going to get into because I don't want to spoil it for anyone who's never read them. But he really, you know, starts to develop story points that you're going to have to wait a long time to get the payoff for. I also like the fact that he gave us a deeper glimpse into Julie's backstory in this issue, which does a really good job of now allowing us to understand that the things that she said in the previous issues about victims of assault and, you know, terrible acts of violence that were perpetrated against them were responsible for that, when in reality, you now understand that this is just her misguided way of trying to deal with the trauma that she herself faced, and she was blaming herself for what happened to her, and then that blame was then manifesting in her blaming other people for the things that had happened to them that none of them were really truly at fault for. They were all victims of terrible acts that were committed against them, and she was just kind of, you know, having a terrible time of dealing with the trauma that she suffered only a few years before the beginning of this comic takes place. Like I said, overall, this is a great book that if you just read it as it sits as issue number 3, you don't realize quite how great it is, because you're not getting the story that this book is setting the groundwork for. But these are just my thoughts. Your thoughts may be different. If you've read all of the series, you might think that this issue isn't that great at all. Or maybe you agree and you're like me and you think it's fantastic. But that's okay, because everybody's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. and thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.